All right, so last week, Rhett, Kyle, and Aiden, they got us started with our early wide receiver rankings, looking at the receivers that we had rate from 13 to 24. Tonight, Jorge, Kyle, and I, we're here to finish the job. We're going to look at the wide receivers ranked 1 through 12. Let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
All right, welcome to Fourth and Frames. I know that this is not the guy you're used to doing this stuff. Oh, man.
It's fine, Stephanie. You're absolutely right.
I love you, baby. Shout out to you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now that as I try to recover from that, so Rhett's usually the one doing this. He would be much more professional at this point. We would still be rolling. There wouldn't be any pauses. But we appreciate you joining. While you're here, if you could like, subscribe, review, to make sure that you're aware anytime Fantasy and Frames drops a new live show, a new podcast, any shorts, anything like that. You can search for all the individual podcasts here at Fantasy and Frames by whichever name of the podcast you listen to. So for us, if you could look up Fourth and Frames, go subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. We would greatly appreciate that as well. And make sure to head over to the website. Go look at fantasyandframes.com. We've got weekly rankings. We've got IDP rankings. We've got Dynasty rankings. We've got redraft rankings, obviously, because we're about to talk about some of those articles. Kyle has been pumping out the articles. I'll let him pump up a couple of those here shortly as well. All that stuff is there. But Jorge, I'm going to start with you because you should be pretty well warmed up at this point, considering you've got a marathon going on tonight. So show number 3 of the night. How are you, man?
Dude, I'm amped up. You know, this show is my baby. This is the first podcast we've ever had here at Fantasy and Frames, and what you guys have been doing with it has been fantastic. Yeah, so for those who are tuning in now and who are just getting to the Fantasy and Frames channels that we're broadcasting on, which is our Facebook, our YouTube, our Twitter, we got some individual handles that are being that are broadcasting. It's Fantasy and Frames Wednesday, as it is every week. And obviously Wednesday happens once a week. And we started off at 8 p.m. Eastern with Dynasty 365, looking at players over the past 3 seasons who've been drafted in the past 3 seasons, rather, and seeing whether they've met expectations, exceeded expectations, or just, they have not met expectations. So we did that both for Dynasty 365 and then for Shoot the Gap. We just finished our IDP Fantasy Football show. Same premise. We had Mike Wohlert from the IDP show joining us, longtime friend and the Fantasy and Frames family, one of the legends in the IDP community and space, content creator, just great guy. So yeah, man. And so now here we go. We're on Fourth and Frames. We got Drew, got Kyle. I too also want to say, Kyle, you have been churning out content and articles at Fantasy and Frames like crazy. And like what Drew, to second what Drew just said, why don't you tell people about that and all that other stuff you got going on?
Yeah, I've been doing some Dynasty risers, Dynasty fallers. I know this is primarily a redraft, but a lot of us redraft players, we love Dynasty. It makes you feel like you're running a franchise, so to speak. But yeah, if you're a Dynasty player, I've been doing some Dynasty articles on risers like Ladd McConkey, some fallers like James Cook. What else? Jackson Smith-Njigba was a riser for me in Dynasty. And then I got one more coming out, a quarterback riser in Bo Nick. So check that out sometime maybe next week. Just head over to fantasyandframes.com, and I got all those Dynasty articles written up and more to come because I'm actually kind of enjoying just once I get going, I can't stop.
It's a beautiful sickness, man, but you've been doing great work, and I know our readers will be better for it. Oh my gosh, come on.
Love it.
I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. I missed you. Oh man. God, I love those kids. Okay, so we're gonna get right into it then. We've surprisingly enough, you would think, it's the off season. If there is such a thing, there shouldn't really be much news or anything like that, but we've got a pretty packed news and notes segment this week. So Albert, what's up, man? Appreciate you joining us as always. Appreciate your continued support. So let's jump right into the news and notes. J.K. Dobbins has officially signed with the Broncos on a 1-year, $5.25 million deal. Now I am in the category that I'm not too worried for RJ Harvey, but before I get into that, do either of you guys disagree? Would you guys want to have a debate about RJ Harvey standing following this? So I'll open up the floor to you guys. What's up, Kobe?
Cal, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, I was just going to quickly toss it over to Drew real quick with a question before we get into a possible debate. What is your snap share prediction for RJ Harvey? Let's see if we have a debate.
I love you, buddy. Good night. Sleep good. So snap share, I would say probably about, if I had to put a number on it, I would say he'll probably end up around 65%.
Okay. We can have a little debate after I hear from Jorge.
Yeah, man. I would probably say 65 sounds fair. Yeah.
Oh, so this is a 2-on-1 here.
Buckle up, Kyle.
Yep.
Okay. Who's going to start? Me? You?
So I'm assuming that you're expecting less by your reaction.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. All right. And I've actually always felt, even in Dynasty, I feel like RJ Harvey's being a little bit overvalued because what is Sean Payton known for? He uses 2 running backs. That's who he is. Last year with the Broncos, Javonte Williams held down a 52% snap share and 29% was Jaleel McLaughlin. Mm-hmm. 2023 was a little odd. There was like 3 or 4 different backs spread evenly, so we'll just take that one out. The only years that I really found was Alvin Kamara in 2021. He had a dominant snap share, but 2020, Latavius Murray carved out a 36% role, and Latavius Murray in 2019 carved out a 40% role. So even if you are right, he gets that 55-60% share. There, you agree then that there is a role for the RB2 in that offense. So how much do you really expect out of RJ Harvey getting a 55-60% snap share when Sean Payton uses 2 backs? Because RJ Harvey is not really the biggest guy. He's built pretty good, but he's only 5'8". So I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about how much of a role he's even going to have with a 60% snap share.
Yeah, I mean he is 5'8", but he's got the BMI though. Like, so I'm not concerned about his size. The first thing that I would say is just like whenever you look at basic team building philosophy, right? RJ Harvey was so coveted by Sean Payton and the Broncos front office that they took him with the 60th overall pick. Second round draft pick. Most draft folks thought that was a reach. So they liked the guy so much that they went and got him in the second round before anybody else could grab him on the third round, because apparently there were teams like the Jaguars that were also targeting RJ Harvey, but a little bit later. So made him a clear priority in the NFL draft, second round pick. We always talk about day 2 draft capital, but the hit rate even on second round running backs versus third round running backs in day 2, the second round running backs hit at a considerably higher rate. Now, J.K. Dobbins, on the other hand, he's been a free agent this entire offseason, right? And he's just now being signed. So if they had this vision that J.K. Dobbins was going to be the guy and he was going to be like a significant piece of their backfield, I think that they would have made him a priority much earlier in the free agency process. And so I think if you're worried about Dobbins and and I don't think you're saying that he's going to end up being the guy, but I have seen people out there that have said that this could end up being Dobbins' backfield and things like that. And I think that they're just more so focused on the fact that he was a top 20 running back in fantasy points per game last year, and they weren't focused enough on the actual performance. There were 46 running backs that had at least 100 rushing attempts last year. Among those 46 players, Dobbins had the 3rd highest stuff percentage. He was 27th out of 46 in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was 28th in yards after contact per attempt, but he was 10th in yards before contact per attempt. So, I mean, lucky for him, he's going to another team that also has a really good offensive line. So the yards before contact numbers are probably still going to be there. But as a player, he wasn't very efficient. And for a team that wanted to run the ball as much as the Chargers did, the Chargers were another team that if Dobbins was that great of an asset, they could have just brought him back as opposed to spending a first-round pick on a running back, drafting another, and signing Najee. They chose to pass on Dobbins. So I think that, and I was a big J.K. Dobbins guy whenever he came out. Don't get me wrong, but I think people's feelings toward J.K. Dobbins whenever he was coming out of college and what we all thought he was going to be before the injuries, which are extremely unfortunate and are no fault of J.K. Dobbins. But I think that name value that he still carries and the fact that he was a productive fantasy asset last year, I think that that's carrying too much sting whenever somebody saw, oh, the Broncos just signed J.K. Dobbins. Whereas like with the college game, the NFL game, they're completely different, right? But whenever you look at the draft eligible running backs that had at least 50 rushing attempts last year, RJ Harvey was 6th in missed back tackles forced. He was 9th in PFF rushing grade. He was 10th in breakaway run percentage. The dude can catch the ball too. He was 3rd in yards per reception as well. I think that RJ Harvey is a better player at this point, and it's no fault to J.K. Dobbins that he's been injured and Harvey hasn't. But I think the biggest thing going for Dobbins is that he will be a better pass protector out the gate, and so that should get him on the field on some third downs and should be where I think a lot of the snap share is going to come. But I think even as a pass catcher, RJ Harvey could be better right from the jump. And so I just think whenever you invest the draft capital that you did in RJ Harvey, and you wait as long as you did to bring J.K. Dobbins in, I think it says more about how they feel about Jaleel McLaughlin and Archer Estime than how they feel about RJ Harvey. And so like that's why I do think he'll be around the 65% snap share. And that's for me, that's like on the low end. I think it could end up being more of like a 70-30 thing. But I do think Dobbins will be more factor at the beginning of the year than he will be at the end of the year. So very long-winded way of saying that I'm not concerned about RJ Harvey personally. I think that this is more so an indictment on behind RJ Harvey. We had nobody we could depend on because we gave McLaughlin, Estime, they both got long looks last year. They did squat behind Javonte, and so we couldn't ask rookie RJ Harvey to carry the same load and expect better results out of the guys behind him. So I think it's more about those guys than it is Harvey himself.
No, all those are very – I'm sorry, Jorge. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you nailed it right on the head there with, and that's where I was kind of hesitant to give you the percentage because I agree. I think you're going to see Harvey down the stretch of the season assert himself into a role more so than to start the season. I think I'm always weary of rookies and just starting the year unless your name is Ezekiel Elliott and you're running behind that Dallas Cowboys offensive line that was prolific. Denver's offensive line is not exactly to that tier of that elite level of run blocking. So that being the case, I definitely see at the start of the season, J.K. Dobbins having more of a go than R.J. Harvey taking more snaps as the season progresses. But let's not forget, you mentioned, Kyle, the two-back situation with Sean Payton. How about Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara? It's not like
I didn't even go there. You're right.
It's not even like that was a fantasy duo for years while they both were in New Orleans before Ingram went to the Baltimore Ravens and Kamara took over lead role duty. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that both of these guys, especially to start the season, could definitely be somebody that you could have as your potential flex or RB2 and a flex option going forward. As the season progresses, does that stay the same? I don't think so. I think one of them is going to separate themselves. And it's, to all the points that Drew is making as far as his efficiency metrics, it's kind of hard to say that RJ Harvey, if things go as planned and the opportunity is there, I think he runs away with it. No pun intended.
No, all those are very fair points. It kind of reminds me, this could be like a Tampa Bay backfield where it was Rashad White in the beginning and then Bucky Irvin took off. What was it, like second half of the season, week 8 and beyond? So it could be something like that. So I was just going to say, for the RJ Harvey lovers, you might have to sit and wait a little bit before he gets popping. But yes, I do agree with you guys.
See, so I'll push back on that just because I think the shift from Rashad White to Bucky was very sharp. Mm-hmm. Just because if you look, and we talked about this last year, about the year before, that you look at his receiving metrics, Rachaad White was a great fantasy asset. It was great, as a pass catching running back. Horrible running the ball, being a running back, right? So the second Bucky Irving got on the field, it's like, ooh, I can run. It's like, okay, you're done. Rachaad White, you're done.
Actually, run the ball. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Whereas J.K. Dobbins, he can run. And to Drew's point, like it sucks all those injuries happened with him in Baltimore, but his first year back, from injury. Dude was lights out when he had the opportunity. So it's not to say that at the gate both of these guys can't be viable for you.
Yeah. So speaking of running backs, we had another running back signing. Nick Chubb signing 1 year, $2.5 million deal. We live in a world where J.K. Dobbins got paid more than Nick Chubb, but his could be worth up to $5 million with the Houston Texans. So. Kyle, I'll start with you. Is this more of a split backfield now in Houston, or do you think Nick Chubb is just a really valuable handcuff?
I'm going to be cautiously optimistic here. I mean, he's 29 years old, and from all accounts, his workout videos that I've seen, he does look pretty good. I am rooting for him, but I think this is more of a good football move than anything for fantasy. Not a handcuff for me if you have Joe Mixon. Rather just shoot for the upside late in drafts, because Nick Chubb's going to be a late round pick, let's be honest. I just think, unfortunately, age has caught up to Nick Chubb. Injuries have caught up to Nick Chubb. And even when he played last year before his injury, he just looked like a shell of himself. And I'm kind of out on Nick Chubb, sadly.
Jorge, any disagreements there?
Up until the aforementioned Steelers linebacker swept the leg Karate Kid style, but in a more gruesome manner on Nick Chubb. Was he on a cliff there? I mean, I thought he was like doing Nick Chubb things. I'm pulling up his numbers as we.
I think he averaged 3.3 yards a carry on his way out. I mean, he wasn't thrilling.
Prior to the humongous injury, I mean, it was very short-lived.
Yeah, he had two, right? Like
the really, really big injury happened like 2 weeks into the year or something, right? And then he got injured again whenever he tried to come back from that. So, like, prior to the first big injury, he seemed like he was his normal self. But then whenever trying to come back from the just stacking him on, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he did look like a different player trying to come back from this last injury.
Sure. No, and I mean that's somewhat understandable. You go back to 2023 when he had that 2-game season and he got the injury against Pittsburgh. Dude was averaging in his first 2 games 6.1 yards per carry. So I mean, I'm not saying that you're expecting 6.1 yards per carry from Nick Chubb now, given the injury, but I think. I hate doing this, but then at the same time, there are situations where it's justified. And I'm using a golf analogy here. Sometimes you got to give players a mulligan coming off of like extreme injuries, like he just came from. Like it wasn't just like an ACL; it was like an ACL, a dislocation, an LCL, a PCL. Like so many things tore at his knee. But at the end of the day, the Texans had to give him a physical. Obviously, he passed the physical, and they're like, all right, here you're a part of the team. You're going to be on what should be a bounce back offense from an offensive fantasy production standpoint. And you hit the nail right on the head, Cal. Is he going to be a late round draft pick for a lot of people? Yes, absolutely. Definitely going to be a value there. And the question now becomes, what does that do with Joe Mixon? If anything, as we get down to the stretch of the season, obviously at the beginning of the season, Mixon should be the featured running back there, but I'm not ready to put the nail in the coffin of Nick Chubb just yet, as far as being somebody who can bounce back to a point of being at least at minimum flex worthy.
That's fair.
Yeah, it's never easy to put the nail in the coffin on the guys that we've loved for so long, man. I mean, Nick Chubb was the poster child of he might not catch passes, but he's such a good runner. I don't give a shit. I'm still going to draft him extremely early, But that's another issue though, is you can't insert Nick Chubb into this offense and be like, oh, he'll be the third down guy because he's never been a pass catcher like that. That's if anybody's going to take that work, it's probably going to be Woody Marks, the rookie that's going to step in and be the pass catcher because of how good he was in that role at USC. And so it's just like then you got Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb who are going to somehow split up that other work, and it's tough to know. And then once we get into the middle of the season, what if they start splitting up the red zone carries and the carries inside the 5 and those money carries? Like what if Nick Chubb does look good and then he starts mixing in with that? Like I don't know. I don't feel like I should be worried about Nick Chubb, but it's hard to forget who Nick Chubb used to be too, and remember where he is now. And so it's a tough situation. Altogether. I don't know if Colby is still here in the chat with us, but if you are,
surprised.
I would love to get the Texans fan reaction of what you think this backfield is going to look like. But
he's currently in the toilet throwing up, looking at my backdrop here.
So let me ask you a question: is Nick Chubb is he a valuable handcuff from your situation? Obviously, we're not thinking about handcuffs to start the season, but like, is he somebody that if you're the Mixon owner, you're kind of like, especially if you have deep benches and whatnot, are you like, yeah, I'm going to take Nick Chubb just because? If you have a shallow bench, obviously not, but like. For those deeper rosters?
If you have a deep bench, I would say yeah. But typically I don't like to draft my own handcuff because then at that point I feel like I'm making a bet that the player that I picked early in the draft is going to fail. Right. Like I'm betting against myself. But I do like to draft other people's handcuffs and hope that I'm not the one that gets hit with the bad luck. So right. But I do think that we'll be in a situation where if something was to happen with Joe Mixon, if he did go down to injury, I do think Nick Chubb would step into that early down role. And so I do think he would have a clear defined role if Mixon wasn't in the picture. So I do think he has value as a handcuff, but it's not one of those things where like, if I draft Joe Mixon, now I have to make sure I'm drafting Nick Chubb. But I would understand if somebody felt differently though.
Roger.
Okay. So next piece of news, this one we're just going to kind of skim over because we're going to talk about him shortly, but Amon-Ra St. Brown said that he underwent surgery on his knee after the season. Apparently who knew, but expects to be ready for training camp. It doesn't seem like this should affect his ability for 2025. Obviously, we still have a couple months until like the heat of draft season gets here for us. And if for some reason he's still limited heading into the season, then at that point it's another story. But right now it seems like more of just information than anything. So we'll talk about Amon-Ra and how we feel about him a little bit later. Spoiler alert. But next piece. Another veteran signing. Aaron Rodgers has signed a 1-year contract to be the next quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the last piece of news, I started with Kyle. So Jorge, I will start with you here. Who is the biggest winner for fantasy football purposes with Rodgers now in Pittsburgh?
Roman Wilson. No, I'm kidding. But maybe not. I mean, you never know. I mean, obviously it's DK. I mean, he's going to have to. He's been working with DK Metcalf this offseason. Before the draft, after the draft. So obviously there's always some inkling that he was going to sign with Pittsburgh. It's just a matter of when that was going to happen. And it's evident by the fact that he was working with this guy. So the fact that they're already working on building some chemistry there is very appealing. The issue I think people are going to have with Rodgers going to Pittsburgh is known as being a run-heavy team, and their offensive line is very good for run blocking, not really good for pass blocking. We haven't seen a prolific quarterback coming from Pittsburgh since Big Ben. So it's kind of like, is he? Here's the ultimate question. We know Mike Tomlin is a no-nonsense coach. It's his way or the highway, like, and he's earned that right. Super Bowl champion coach. Like, this guy has been running this organization, been the head coach of this team for decades. Like, okay, we get it. It's his team. Is he going to acquiesce to Aaron Rodgers and basically say, hey, Aaron Rodgers, screw Arthur Smith's system. You can run whatever you want? Or is Rodgers going to have to conform to this 2 tight ends running system here of Arthur Smith? And if that's the case, if that means you're going to have to put make Aaron Rodgers more conservative of a player, that's a little bit concerning. In fact, that's a lot concerning. However, if that were to be the case, I definitely think you see a bump up in Freiermuth's fantasy value just because of how they utilize the tight end in Arthur Smith's offense. But if it's a combo of Smith-Rodgers, then I think DK is going to be shooting up draft boards.
Yeah, I agree. Kyle, any disagreements there? Are you on board with the DK love following the Rodgers signing as well?
Yeah, that's the same guy I said. I mean, it's DK Metcalf. I mean, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers have one of the worst number twos in the league with Robert Woods. No knock on Woods. It's just
Whoa. Come on. Bobby Tree is the disrespect. I mean, even at this age, but still, come on.
as a number two, though. I mean, all I'm trying to say is DK Metcalf is about to get fed by Aaron Rodgers. I talked about it a little bit last week, how when he was with Devontae Adams in New York last year from like week 7 to week 18, Adams received a 35% first redesign target share, and DK Metcalf has never received any kind of volume like that. Yeah, he's received volume with Russell Wilson in Seattle days. He has, but not like this. And if he gets volume like this with Aaron Rodgers targeting him like the only receiver in Pittsburgh, he's going to way outperform that average draft position of consensus number 24. He's going as a wide receiver 24. I said last week, and I'll say it again, DK Metcalf right now it's official with Aaron Rodgers. He should be able to crack that top 15 at wide receiver this year.
That's spicy. I can tell you, I had him comfortably outside my top 30 before the Rodgers news. And I know that we kind of were supposed to assume that Rodgers was going to sign there, but he just feels like such a wild card. I didn't feel comfortable doing so. But once we got the news, I did move Metcalf up to wide receiver 21. So I do have him comfortably inside my top 24 yet. Not quite to the top 15 point. But I am much more excited about DK Metcalf now that Rodgers is there, and that, with them moving on from George Pickens, like you said, the wide receiver, this is going to be probably the least talented group of wide receivers that Metcalf has played alongside in his entire career, considering the Tyler Lockett's and JSNs of the world that he played with to start his career. So yeah, I think we should be excited for DK Metcalf. And the one other piece of advice I'll give is don't let Aaron Rodgers, the person off the field, factor into how you feel about his on-field performance. Like, he's not the back-to-back MVP that he used to be, but he's also not this scrub that so many people want him to be just because they don't like the stuff he says off the field. And I'm not the biggest fan of him off the field either, but on the field, we need to stop acting like this isn't a humongous upgrade over Mason Rudolph. But more quarterback news. This one hurts me deeply. Anthony Richardson is dealing with a shoulder injury, will not participate in minicamp as of now. I know he wanted to seek a second opinion, but it seems like it's going to be an even bigger possibility than before this news that Daniel Jones is going to be the quarterback for the Colts to start the season. So, Kyle, is this a good or a bad thing for the weapons in Indy?
Man, unfortunately, I have to downgrade all the Colts receivers, including Josh Downs, who I really do love, but he's going to have to take a back seat. Why? Daniel Jones is allergic to throwing to the end zone. That's why. Last year in 10 games, he attempted 341 passes. Do you know how many times he attempted the end zone, guys? 9. Wow. 341 pass attempts. He threw to the end zone 9 times.
That offense probably wasn't down there very often for him to even be able to throw to it in the first place.
Right. And to give you an idea, Joe Burrow led the league with end zone passes with 57. But in 2022, as a full-time starter, another year with Daniel Jones, 11 end zone throws. He's allergic. I'm staying away from him.
So I saw a report today that he went to get that second opinion, and there was concern that there could be surgery on the horizon. But apparently his second opinion said it's better off him just resting than having surgery, and that's going to be the better option. So then the question is okay, how long is that rest period going to be? I think we're all on the same page here. I think it's the Daniel Jones show here in Indy for the foreseeable future. Unless, Drew, you disagree.
No, I don't think he holds on to it for the entire year, and which I don't think that's what you're saying. But I do think for, like you said, for the foreseeable future to start the year, I do think Daniel Jones is going to be the guy. I think it is a very, very, very slight upgrade just because Anthony Richardson's passing numbers, as much as I love Anthony Richardson, they were down there around the Tim Tebow line. Even Daniel Jones from a completion percentage, things like that, he sucks. He's not much higher. Whenever I say upgrade, I literally mean if Anthony Richardson is here, Daniel Jones is here. So it's not much of an upgrade to speak of. The one piece that it makes the only piece, because I'm with you, Kyle. I don't really have any faith in the pass catchers for Indy. The one thing it does make me feel better of, though, is I I think Daniel Jones is less likely to steal goal line carries away from Jonathan Taylor than Anthony Richardson would have been. And so I like JT as a player, but I was kind of concerned about that factor if Richardson's healthy. And with Daniel Jones playing quarterback, I'm a little bit more confident in the touches that Jonathan Taylor will get. So slight bump up for JT for me. Outside of that, I think it's lateral at best for the rest of the offense. And he's certainly not as fun to watch as Anthony Richardson. So I will not be turning on Colts games in anticipation of seeing what could happen next, like I would at least whenever Richardson was out there. Last piece of news, and we'll just go through this one really quickly because, nothing really needs to be said other than this guy is incredible. The Ravens have signed wide receiver Rashad Bateman to a 3-year contract worth $36.75 million. And if you turned into Dynasty 365, you heard them besmirch the name Rashad Bateman, and I'm here real quick to just clear that shit up. Because reason number one, the dude's a dog. Reason number two, he gives the Ravens offense something that nobody else on the team can. Whenever you look at the full-time pass catchers in this offense last year, he was he had an ADOT of 15, which was first among their usual group of pass catchers, 11.28 yards per target, 16.8 yards per reception, and he was tied with Mark Andrews for the most end zone targets. He's a red zone threat. He's a deep threat. And it's nice that he's attached to Lamar Jackson, but for fantasy purposes, whenever you're playing on a team where Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews are pretty likely to finish with a higher target share than you, and the Ravens had the second lowest total number of pass attempts last year, his role does translate to a better and best ball type of guy. But better and best ball is usually a phrase that I reserve for guys that just aren't good. And I don't think that's the case for Rashad Bateman at all. Like, I do agree with what JT said on Dynasty 365 that I do think he's a better option in best ball because of his deep playability and the fact that the passing volume in Baltimore is as low as it is. But I disagree with the fact that he couldn't be more impactful on a different team. I think that Rashad Bateman is a really underrated route runner. And if he would have ended up going to Dallas as the number 2 option on that passing offense instead of George Pickens on an offense that actually will throw the ball, I think we would have gotten to see how good he truly is. Like, I think Baltimore does limit his upside from a fantasy standpoint, but I think it's very clear that they understand the value that he brings on an NFL field with the contract that they gave him, despite the fact that if you just box score scout him outside of his touchdowns last year, his stats don't look very worthy of a contract extension. But I appreciate the fact that the Ravens understand and see that he is more than what meets the eye whenever you look at his box scores. And I do think if he was able to move on to a different offense with higher passing volume, that we would be able to see that. But now we'll never know because he's in Baltimore for 3 more years, and they're going to continue to run the ball more than anybody in the league and pass the ball damn near toward the bottom. And so we'll never get to see that. So for fantasy purposes, this is all null and void. I just wanted to show Rashad Bateman some love on the Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel. I could not let the Dynasty 365 stand on its own as the lone Fantasy and Frames opinion. I had to get the other side of the table on there. But for fantasy purposes, especially for redraft leagues, this really isn't huge news. You can decide who you like more between him and Darnell Mooney or something like that, but it's something that, it's going to break the bank for fantasy football. But we're over 30 minutes in, and we haven't even talked about wide receiver rankings. So unless you guys have something to add on Rashad Bateman, we can jump in.
Well, don't tempt me, but I think we're good unless you. Yeah.
No, Drew said it all.
We
at least have one thing. Bateman is the deep threat, Zay is the yak monster, and Andrews is the OG. But it's likely season.
If I was just to say something really quick, his numbers have actually, as not good as they are, they actually have gone up. So that is a plus. I mean, since 2022, his numbers have increased.
He couldn't stay on the field.
So I mean. He had 700 and something yards this year. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's going up. So if he can increase that even more, he's damn near 1,000-yard receiver. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. He's probably just going to need some guys to miss time in front of him if we want him to be like an actual factor in our typical redraft leagues. Okay, so wide receivers 1 through 12, the Fantasy and Frames consensus rankings. If you want to look at those consensus rankings, you can go over to fantasyandframes.com. There's going to be a nice little rankings tab at the
top of the screen. There you go. Nice
Because I
little
wanted to
segue
walk
there.
through it with you, but this hotel internet is not allowing me to do so. But anyway, nonetheless, we're going to go through wide receivers 1 through 12, and we have our consensus rankings over on the website. And if you want draft rankings, we got them. If you want dynasty rankings, we got them. If you want rookie rankings, we got them. If you want IDP rankings, we got them. But looking at the consensus rankings, wide receiver 1 through 3 has been mostly pretty consistent. The top 3 is pretty clear for the most part, between Jamar Chase at wide receiver 1, Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 2, and CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver 3. But I stopped there to say, Jorge, we're going to have to start with you here because you're the only one out of all of the Fantasy and Frames rankers that doesn't have CeeDee Lamb in your top 3. And now you didn't bury him. I mean, you've got him, right next to that at 4. But Puka Nacua, you're speaking my love language. I love this. He's your wide receiver 3. Is this just more of like you're really excited for Puka this year, or is there something that concerns you with CeeDee Lamb that has you having Puka ahead?
So both. To answer to the short answer to your question, I and we'll get into this obviously a little bit later, but I'm expecting this Rams offense to be better than the Super Bowl year a couple of years ago. Like I'm expecting huge things from this Rams offense as a whole, which is why obviously I'm very high on Puka Nacua and I have him ranked as my number 3 wide receiver. The situation in Dallas, and it's not as simple as just, oh, well, they got George Pickens. They're going to split targets. He's going to get fewer looks this way, which is true, theoretically. But I look to what, Brian Schottenheimer has done over the course of his career, being a play caller and having some influence in the play calling. And this is throwing it back. And I was talking about this on 365 and, going back to the Jets days where he was the offensive coordinator for Rex Ryan and he had LaDainian Tomlinson, who was a shell of himself, but yet was great, was, a great fantasy producer, was a great running back, had the running attack was, I want to say in yardage, like top 7 in the NFL. Then he goes to Seattle, run heavy oriented team, even with Russell Wilson there. Very big on promoting the running game, emphasizing the running game. Now goes to Dallas. They have a stable of running backs, and that's the nicest way I could phrase it. And I think that's the nicest way people everywhere can phrase it.
They do technically play running back. This is true.
They do have running backs. You have Javonte, you have Miles Sanders. And the question is, does he stay true to his roots and he keeps trying to hammer home the running back and just trying to figure out, okay, well, who's gonna keep this going? Does he keep it conservative is basically where I'm trying to lead with this. And then you go to George Pickens and you look at all the talk that we've been hearing about him. Like, is he just a deep ball guy? Does he have more to his repertoire than just being the big deep ball guy? Or does he have some moves? Can he do something? Can he be basically CeeDee Lamb, 2.0 and be somebody who can cut on a dime and is very elusive and shifty all over the field? If that's the case, if the latter is the case, then that's a problem for CeeDee, because now you're taking away what made CeeDee so valuable. If now Pickens is somebody who they're just going to be like, you know what, you were doing great things being that deep ball guy for Pittsburgh under bad quarterback conditions. You have Dak Prescott throwing you the ball now. Let's not ruin a bad thing. Just keep going long, and CeeDee, you keep doing your thing. That's the thing. We don't know. And the shot from the Schottenheimer influence to the targets going Pickens' way, how they're going to use Pickens, it opens the door for a little bit more of a question for me, or at least a few questions, which is why I have them 4th, not 3rd.
Yeah, and we're really getting into the nitty gritty, trying to pick apart the details here. So for those that are following along, listening with us, that's something that I would ask you to keep in mind, is that we're talking about 12 wide receivers that are all ranked relatively close to each other. So whenever we're talking about differences, we're talking about very minor differences and just very, very small things here. But yeah, the lack of running game is definitely something to where I think CD, even with George Pickens being there, is still going to have an extremely high target share. I think Dak is one of the biggest winners of all of it. I think that his quarterback 14 ADP, he's one of my favorite late round quarterbacks this year. As long as he stays healthy, he's as good as anybody to finish top 5 in pass attempts and passing yards. But so for me personally, the way the top of the receiver rankings break out, before, and I know we'll talk about Devontae Adams a little bit later, but before Devontae Adams signed with the Rams, I was with you. I wanted to have Puka as my wide receiver 3. He was in that tier 1 of wide receiver rankings. But whenever the Rams brought in Adams, I did have to drop him a little bit. So my top tier receiver became pretty clear that it was Jamar Chase, it was Justin Jefferson, and it was CeeDee Lamb, who, ironically, I think those are the last 3 receivers that were wide receiver 1 overall the last 3 years. And so those were kind of the clear top 3 for me after Puka got that additional target competition. But I can't blame anyone for feeling differently. But getting out of those consensus top 3 receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, a lot of this is my fault, but he's our consensus wide receiver 6. But Kyle, you've got him up at wide receiver 4. You're the highest among us on Amon-Ra St. Brown. So why don't you talk to me a little bit on why he's the next man up for you outside of your top 3 receivers?
And this is actually, when you look at rankings for wide receiver, this is about where the rankings really start, is number 4, because you can go anywhere with the top 3 like you guys discussed. This wasn't easy for me, but yeah, I'm going Amon-Ra St. Brown here at 4. I don't understand the reason of concern of him not being any higher than 4. He's consistent, 1,100-yard receiver, double-digit touchdowns. He's stayed healthy this whole time. Yeah, he's going through some type of minor procedure now that he's had done, but all accounts, he's good to go. I'm gonna take that word for it. The only thing I could think of is like maybe there's pause for concern because Ben Johnson's out of town, but I'm gonna bet on his talent and his chemistry with Jared Goff. And the reason that Dan Campbell promoted John Morton to the offensive coordinator was so he didn't have to overhaul that offense completely. And he was actually there in Detroit with Campbell before, back in 2022, as a senior offensive assistant. And even before all that, he was an offensive coordinator for the Jets back in 2017. So what I'm trying to get at is he does have the experience. He's been around. He knows ball. When he was with the Jets, they weren't very good, but this offense is much better. So I'm just going to bank on the chemistry and the talent of Amon St. Brown and Jared Goff.
Yeah, and I think that's really fair. I will play devil's advocate because I am the lowest among all of our rankers. I've got him down at wide receiver 8, and it's really not a knock on Amon-Ra. I still think that he is an incredible player. Part of it is just making a bet on some emerging younger receivers like Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London that you have to factor in. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Amon-Ra is still young himself. Like, I don't even know if he's 26 years old yet. But the guys I just listed, these are guys that last year we weren't even considering ranking in front of him. And this year I think that there's at least an argument for. So that's part of it. You mentioned the Ben Johnson piece. That's definitely part of it too. I think if he is this play caller that we have built him up to be, and this guy that is so highly thought of as a play caller, I think that kind of the unknown of not knowing what the next guy is going to bring is something to factor into it. But another piece of it for me too is his quarterback. If you remember this time last year, Jared Goff was everybody's favorite late round quarterback because he basically played every single damn game in a dome. Like, his entire schedule just shook out to where he was playing indoors for every single game. And we all know about the indoor versus outdoor splits for Jared Goff. And as silly as that sounds, it is a very real thing. And that's not going to be the case this year. They've got road games against Philly, Baltimore, and Kansas City, not to mention the divisional road games against Green Bay and Chicago. This should be tough environments. So you're talking about 6 games right there where he's going to be out of his element in tough situations. I can't remember where the schedule shakes out to where those land into it, but that's a minor piece of it. The bigger piece of Goff that I'm concerned about is that I think the passing touchdowns in general for this offense is going to come down just because of the outlier season that Goff had last year. He finished with a 6.9% touchdown rate last year, which was a full percentage point higher than his previous career best, which was whenever he was with a Los Angeles Ram. He was at 5.9%. It was almost 2 points higher than his best with the Detroit Lions, which is a considerable amount. I know 2 percentage points might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about TD rate, it's a considerable amount. And so I think that it's not that hard to paint a picture where maybe Gibbs accounts for more rushing touchdowns or a healthy David Montgomery accounts for more rushing touchdowns. And that touchdown rate comes back down to the fours where we're used to seeing Jared Goff. And if that does happen, that's going to hurt Amon-Ra to an extent, in my opinion, because although the volume was still solid last year, he had the lowest amount of targets since his rookie season, but yet he had the most receiving touchdowns of his entire career, which was 12 for a career high. Now, it's not all bad. I can't sit here and just shit talk Amon-Ra because I think too highly of him as a player. I said that he had his lowest amount of targets since his rookie year. He was still ninth among pass catchers in targets, so it's not like he was dying for targets. And he was also still 10th in targets per route run, 9th in yards per route run, and he had the 14th highest first read percentage. So, like, I still think Amon-Ra is a solid receiver. I still think that he's going to be very involved, but the touchdown rate coming back to earth does scare me a little bit, especially if the targets stay similar to where they were or come down a little bit if Jameson Williams does take another step forward. So I still think that Amon-Ra is solid, but I've got him at wide receiver 8. His ADP's at wide receiver 5. It's not a huge difference, but I'm not in love with his ADP, and I am lower than consensus on Amon-Ra this year. So, Jorge, any thoughts on Amon-Ra St. Brown? I know that you have him a spot or two higher than me, but any thoughts on the Amon-Ra debate discussion?
I can see a situation where you have a decrease in passing volume just because you're starting to see the emergence of Jahmyr Gibbs really taking over as one of the best running backs in the NFL, not just on the team. Yeah. David Montgomery, there are only so many years left, I believe, for him to be on the Detroit Lions. And you think about, from things from a narrative perspective, we don't know what exactly the play calling is going to be. And it makes you wonder whether or not a first-time offensive coordinator wants to be a little bit conservative to start the game. And you have two great running backs. Let's focus on that. And then eventually we'll start hammering home more of the receiving options, especially with the home road splits that you were talking about, just the fact that there are going to be more road games, outside games. That is definitely a concern there. But at the end of the day, you know what? Quarterbacks, they love their slot wide receivers to get them out of trouble. And Amon-Ra is playing majority of his snaps in the slot. It just seems like it seems like very bulletproof in terms of where he's going for fantasy drafts and for rankings. And yeah, so it just makes a lot of sense for him not to deviate too much just because of the coaching change.
Yeah. Two other things that I'll say, and then Kyle, if you want to recap anything about Amon-Ra, we'll give you the floor as well. There's two things about him. Number one, I don't think, like, if you want to take Amon-Ra in the back of the first round, I don't think he's going to kill you. Like, I think he is a very safe bet. I think he has a safe floor. I just don't think that the ceiling is the same as guys like maybe Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas Jr. or Drake London. Like, I don't think he's going to offer the same ceiling. And another piece of that, along with what I've already talked about, is something that I think kind of goes under the radar because we're not playing IDP here, Jorge. But the Detroit Lions defense, they're starting to be able to come up a little bit, and part of the intriguing piece of this Lions offense over the years was we knew the defense was so bad that they were just going to constantly be in these shutouts and having to put up points. If the Lions defense improves the way that it should with the personnel they now have in place, I do also think that there's a world where they're not in as many shutouts as they used to be. And maybe that just hurts the overall offense as a whole. But so just another piece that I wanted to throw out there. But Kyle, any other thoughts on Amon-Ra before we move on?
No, the only thing I'll say is Jared Goff's been in Detroit since 2021, and he's played outdoors since then. And Amon-Ra has just balled with Jared Goff. 90 balls his rookie year. 2022, 106 balls, 1161. The next year, 119 catches, 1,500 yards. And then last year, 115 catches, 1,263 yards, all with Jared Goff. And he has played outdoors within the 4 years that they have played together. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, no, very, very fair point. Absolutely. All right. So, Jorge, again, you're speaking my love language, man.
Playing to the audience, playing to the crowd.
Know your podcast team. So your ranking of Davante Adams means that we have to rehash a debate from last week because, and I wish Rhett was here for this one. I really do. But you've got two Rams receivers finishing inside the top 12 with Puka at wide receiver 3, like we already talked about. And then you've got Davante Adams at wide receiver 11. So I think it's pretty safe to say you're expecting a pretty big year for Matthew Stafford and this Rams passing attack, right?
This is probably the most balanced this Rams offense has been in quite some time. Whether it's Kyron Williams running the ball, whether it's Puka Nacua, whether it's Devontae Adams, no disrespect, but kind of some disrespect to Tyler Higbee. His time has kind of passed. We've seen the efficiency metrics, how Terrence Ferguson looked in college, basically near the tops of every one that you think about in terms of the metrics are concerned, and the athletic ability and the yards of the catch and yards per route run. So it's one of those things where his time is going to come sooner rather than later. And, let's talk about Devontae Adams here, and let's talk about Puka Nacua. Devontae Adams, this wouldn't be the first time that he's been a top 12 wide receiver with a fellow teammate. You go back to 2016. I know, and this is the thing that's crazy. 2016, you have Jordy Nelson in points per game, number 2 for Green Bay, and then you have with a gunslinger quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and then at 10 you have Devontae Adams, and then what's he in a situation now? Oh, he's like, yes, he's a few years, 9 years older, but he has a gunslinging quarterback in Matthew Stafford with Puka Nacua, and then he has then he's there on the team. And Devontae Adams, even in like the worst situations that he has been in, which basically was his time in Las Vegas, and then with a weathered Aaron Rodgers for the Jets last year, the guy still produced. And let's just say you take away his yards per target. Let's just say you take away the deep ball. Let's just say he's just used as a red zone target. I mean, last year combined, he had 25 total targets for 6 touchdowns inside the red zone. So he's a big red zone target as well. You go back to 2023, he had 25 red zone targets with 6 touchdowns. And so, you look at the Rams situation in 2024 in red zone targets, Puka Nacua had 13, and then the next highest on the team was Demarcus Robinson with 12. If you don't think Devontae Adams can outperform Demarcus Robinson in terms of getting looks and performance and getting touchdowns in the end zone, you need to stop what you're eating, smoking, whatever it is, drinking, whatever it is you're doing. You need to stop. You need to stop it. All right. You got to have some sanity here. And Devontae Adams, like I said, the balance of this team is going to be ridiculous. I don't see Tutu Atwell eating into, which, by the way, congratulations on being like the wide receiver that made it by attrition in terms of the young wide receivers who never fully developed into what they needed to be. Congratulations to you, Mr. Atwell. Devontae Adams is going to be, if his time's coming to an end, it hasn't been showing. And, again, in bad situations, he still performed. And let's even go back to I think it was 2017, 2018. Jordan Huntley or something was his name when Aaron Rodgers was gone for most of the year. He still cracked 1,000 yards receiving. So Devontae Adams deserves to be in the top 12 when discussing, in a non-PPR and a half PPR. The only argument I could give for half PPR is that just the receptions may not be there as much, which would take away obviously from the full point aspect of the catch. But for everything else, like, he is top 12.
Kyle, anything to add?
Man, I wish Rhett was here because
I know.
He made a comment last week because Jorge, you said pretty much everything I said last week. We had Drew in the background with his pom-poms on, celebrating everything I was saying. You pretty much echoed those same words that I said, and I wish Rhett was here because he made a comment last week that he didn't have the numbers in front of him, but he said he doesn't know how often 2 receivers on the same team crack the top 12 together. Well, I got the numbers in front of me now.
Uh-oh.
It actually happened last year. Guess who did it? Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. Wide receiver 10, wide receiver 11.
2020 and Jamar Chase, if you go by points per game, they were also they were both like top 5 receivers in points per game. Higgins missed some time, so in like total points he wasn't there. But if you look at points per game, we had Higgins and Chase in there too.
Mm-hmm. And then 2022, Hill and Waddle did it. Wide receiver 2, wide receiver 8. In 2021, it barely happened for the LA Chargers. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12. And just to throw out one more for Rhett, 2020, the Seattle Seahawks did it. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 7, and wide receiver 8. So, yes, I do think Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua can enter that conversation.
Yeah, and even AJ Brown and Devontae Smith did it one year as well. They were both top 12 wide receivers too. As a Rams fan, obviously I love this. I think a lot of it really just comes down to the passing touchdown rate. Whenever Stafford, his first year with the Rams, whenever he had 41 passing touchdowns, that ended up coming out to a touchdown rate of 6.8%. Since that first year, his touchdown rate has been 3.3, 4.6, and 3.9. And a lot of that has been due to partially just some of it's bad luck, some of it's been performance, and some of it has just been that Kyren Williams, for as inefficient as he's been as a runner, he has been really, really good in the red zone. But all it takes is for some of those rushing touchdowns to turn into passing touchdowns, and then all of a sudden you could very easily see 2 top 12, 2 top 15 wide receivers. I'm going to continue to bet against Kyren Williams because I just don't believe that a running back as inefficient as he has been can continue to be as successful as he is. There's no way he can keep getting away with this. So I'm going to bet on the Rams passing attack with you guys. I probably need to move Adams up a little bit. I'm surprised, of all people, I'm the one that's low on him. I've got him at wide receiver 18. I think Nate's the only one that's lower. But yeah, I even struggle to get there for 2 top 12 guys, just because I know McVay does like to give Kyren Williams touches down in the money area. But Devontae Adams was also not on the team whenever that was happening, and he presents a threat that the Rams, even with Puka, even with Cooper Kupp, those guys are not the playmaker inside the 5 that Adams is. And so I think that adds a whole different layer to this offense. And I'm with you. I'm betting on a big season for Stafford, for Adams, and for Puka. And I might need to raise Adams up a little bit.
And let's not forget, like, the year that Puka Nacua was drafted, he obviously had the prolific historic rookie year, but Cooper Kupp was missing for a good chunk of that season, right?
Yep.
And then last year he was missing again for a good chunk of this year. So we never saw what the actual fantasy upside could be with both of those guys on the field. What you did know is that both of those guys were getting you double-digit fantasy points in whatever format that you're playing, and the targets were there for both of them. So again, I guess you could say the only thing that could stop Devontae Adams is age and injury. But if he's healthy, I think this is a clear upgraded situation as a whole. You mentioned Kyren Williams and his inefficiency and how you're confused as to how somebody like that could keep finding success. I call it the Melvin Gordon effect. Melvin Gordon was atrocious for the Chargers, yet he eventually had like 1 or 2 seasons where he got above 4 yards per carry, albeit 4.1. And he was, efficient for those 2 seasons, but like it all comes down to opportunity. And until somebody's able to unseat Kyren Williams, and we saw Sean McVay, he doesn't do this whole split backfield situation. Like, no, he locks in on the guy who's producing, and until that changes,
it's changing this year. That's a whole topic for a whole other show, but I think it's changing this year. So. All right, the middle of our receiver rankings, we've talked about, our consensus receiver rankings. We got Chase at 1, Jefferson at 2, CD at 3, Puka at 4, Malik Neighbors at 5, Amon-Ra at 6. We've talked about a decent amount of those guys. There's a pretty big logjam here in the middle, where at some order we all have a mix, a combo of Nico Collins, Drake London, AJ Brown, Brian Thomas Jr. mixed in somewhere between wide receiver 6, wide receiver 10, somewhere in that area. Jorge, among all of us, you're the highest on AJ Brown at wide receiver 8. So let the audience know why they should be excited to draft AJ Brown once again this year.
I'm going to use, and again, this is me being on brand. I'm going to use a Star Wars reference here. It's all about bringing balance to the Force. And I get they had a lot of success with Saquon Barkley, with Jalen Hurts running the ball, and we saw some of the receiving numbers take a hit for both of these wide receivers, for Smith and for AJ Brown. I think that normalizes, because at the end of the day, defenses always adapt from year to year. I don't think you're going to get away with feeding Saquon Barkley as much as he did. I don't think you're going to get away with Jalen Hurts running as much as he did. we've seen in the past couple of years that Jalen Hurts has not exactly been the model of health as well down the stretch during the season. So that is a concern in terms of the rushing attack. I do believe A.J. Brown is one of those quarterbacks that tends to be very quarterback proof and can be targeted heavy and often. And I just think that it's that normalization. Not to mention, we're hearing all these rumors that they're like wanting to get rid of Dallas Goedert. They want to move Dallas Goedert. He's been the subject of trade discussions over the past few months. So you take away those, him, and you have all these vacated targets going in one direction. I like to say from a fantasy standpoint, Devonta Smith and AJ Brown are like 1A, 1B, but when it comes to targets and yardage, it's AJ Brown, and I just feel like that's just gonna everything is gonna correct itself. The force is gonna come back into balance, and he and this Eagles offense are gonna keep flying, but in a different perspective.
Yeah. Whenever it comes to just real life football, AJ Brown is one of the best in the business at the wide receiver position. The volume has really been, one of the main concerns. But like you said, with Saquon possibly all the carries that went his way, there's a world where it comes back to normal a little bit for the passing offense. All right, Kyle, I'm going to turn it to you we're going to talk about another one of these guys. You've got Drake London down at wide receiver 10. I was going to ask you or Aiden to talk about this. Aiden couldn't be with us tonight. Aiden, our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. But so do you have any concerns with Drake London this year, or is this just more of a thing where you just like the guys in front of London a little bit more?
It really, for mostly, it is the guys in front of him. I know London finished top 5 at the position last year, but do we really trust Michael Penix Jr. out of the gate? And then you have a guy like Mike Evans, which I know I'm the most bullish here on this panel, and maybe even industry-wide, because I have him at like wide receiver 12. But why do we do this every year with Mike Evans? All he does is 1,000 yards. We already know that. Double-digit touchdown guy. And we shit on him every single year. I could probably pick out someone in your rankings that you're basically disrespecting Mike Evans. We do it every year. And this year, I'm not going to do it. He's motivated. He's tied with Jerry Rice with the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, 11. Once he gets it this year, he passes him. So why are we taking a guy like Drake London, who did it one time? Can you answer me that?
Okay, so first of all, it was 2 times. Okay, he did it with Michael Penix last year, where he was hyper he was hyper targeted. I mean, look, like, all right. That's all my contribution to what you were just about to say there. I agree with you. Mike Evans, like, he is one of the more prolific fantasy producing wide receivers. And this Tampa Bay offense, like, they want to get him involved. They need to get him involved. They will do anything they can to get him involved. We look at the last game of the season where he needed to get past 1,000 yards, and they were super. I forget how many targets he had that game. It was like it was an absurd number, but they kept forcing and making sure that he got to that 1,000-yard season. If anything, the confusion of what's going to happen with Godwin and Ibuka is really going to tell me, okay, well, we don't know if Godwin's moving outside, where he history-wise has not had as much success as he's had in the slot. Ibuka, does he go outside? Well, he's never played outside. He's been majority playing at the slot at Ohio State. Who's the one constant in this offense, in this receiving game? It's Mike Evans. You know what he does. You have his role solidified. Baker obviously locks into him early and often. Until they get that situation figured out, who's going to be the 2, who's going to be the slot, I think Mike Evans is the surefire person to take for Tampa Bay. So I can see where you're coming from as him being a top 12. I have him at 14, so I'm not exactly far off there. But at the same time, I don't know why people, people just hate on Mike Evans. I think for a long time, it was like he's been a very boomer bust wide receiver in the early parts of his career. Like, he'll throw up a 41-point game, and then he'll put up a 7-point game, or he just won't show up at all. So and yes, Drew, you said it right. Like, he still is, but even then, I still think he has narrowed the gap where it's less boomer bust. Like, there's fewer games in between the explosive games that he's having. So it is something to pay attention to, but I think just the upside and the confusion in that receiving core and them knowing, okay, the one constant is Mike Evans' role. I think that's what I can understand why you have him in your top 12.
Yeah, it's kind of a pick your poison thing. Like with Mike Evans, you know you're going to have a more dependable quarterback in Baker Mayfield, but and you certainly have a much longer track record given how long he's performed at such a high level. But you do also have more target competition with them bringing in Ibuka along with all the guys that were already there, and you have the fact that that Father Time is undefeated and he's another year into his career. I've got him in wide receiver 16, so I'm not too far off from that wide receiver 12 range. But for Drake London, for me, it's a bet on what I believe is a really talented player. He's coming into his prime. And I'm not a big Michael Penix guy, to be completely honest with you. But the one good thing, at least for Drake London purposes, is he targeted Drake London more than he could possibly fucking handle. And if Kyle Pitts doesn't take the step forward, Darnell Mooney, we kind of know what he is. Like I think Drake London has a much more clear path to targets. And while touchdowns are a very hard thing to project and they're not a sticky stat from year to year, while we can't necessarily just look at touchdowns and process that, if you just look at end zone targets and how often players are targeted in that area, Drake London was the number one receiver in end zone targets last year. He was close to 40%, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to find that. Yeah, the red zone target share. Sorry, not just targets, but as far as like the highest red zone target share of last year, Drake London was at 39.4%. And so while the targets themselves, while the touchdown, the counting numbers aren't as easy to count on those target stats, I firmly believe that players earn targets based off their talent first and foremost. And so I think that London has a lot of upside in that aspect. And so it's just like you have one player that's possibly going toward the end of their career, but is still playing very well, and one player that's ascending. And so I tend to go the younger player route whenever they've already proved themselves, at least to a smaller extent. But I also agree that I can understand why Mike Evans would be higher. And there's the reality is at the wide receiver position, there's just a lot of really talented guys. Like we are, especially at the top, we are very, very spoiled at receiver. And another guy to just for a point for that is Nico Collins, who's the guy that I'm highest on among these guys. I've got him at wide receiver 6, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah, so me and Nate both have him at 6, and then he's in the 8, 9, 10 range for most people. Outside of that, but whenever it comes to Nico, the first thing that I'll say is just that whenever he was on the field last year, he was the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game, and he wasn't just great for fantasy; he was incredible on the field as well. There were 66 pass catchers that had at least 75 targets last year. And among those 66 pass catchers, he was 6th in targets per route run, third in yards per route run, 9th in yards per reception, 13th in air yard share, 15th in targets per game, 19th in yards after the catch per reception, and he was 15th in first read percentage. And he had 11 end zone targets despite the fact he only played 12 games. And I know that the Texans added several weapons. They brought in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, the 2 rookies. They brought in Christian Kirk, but I don't see any of them as being on the same level from a talent standpoint or challenging Nico's role. Like Jalen Noel, Christian Kirk, they both appear to be more slow slot receivers. Jaden Higgins, I think, is like an Aldi's version of Nico Collins on the opposite side of the field. So I think that Nico's role as the alpha in this offense is still safe. And we have to keep in mind that Nico did all of this last year in what most consider to be a down year for CJ Stroud. So if you're in the camp that Stroud is going to bounce back this year like I am, I don't know how you can't be excited about Nico Collins. So I've got him a little bit above consensus. He's the guy among this group that I'm excited to draft. But before we move away from this group of guys, any other final thoughts on Nico, Drake London, Mike Evans, AJ Brown, any of these guys that we're talking about here?
One of the things I've been reading about for the new offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans is that the offense is going to let CJ Stroud have a little bit more say on what's going on. They're going to let him call more things at the line of scrimmage. It's going to be less scripted. So one has to wonder, and it's something that we should all be monitoring over the course of OTAs and then when training camp starts, is how does that look? Is that too much for him? Is he can handle it? Like what exactly are we seeing? Is there too much confusion? Does he have too many options? I mean, like, you drafted 2 wide receivers, you traded for another wide receiver, you still have Nico Collins, and now you have a dual threat running back in Joe Mixon, but then you brought in a pure runner in Nick Chubb. Like, what exactly is the identity of this offense going to be? Which is probably why the only reason, I have him at 10. But again, I'm not dissuaded by saying like, oh, you have him a couple spots higher, like you've been saying all episode. Like this, there's not anybody who's like jumping out here that shouldn't, you can't make the case for. I will say though, I do think the Christian Kirk acquisition has the potential to eat into Nico Collins, and I know that's no kidding. Of course, another wide receiver could eat into it, but like, let's not forget, like, he's a couple years removed from being a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. So like, the only reason why he's fallen off the radar for a lot of people is because he's just been dealing with injuries that have taken him out for good chunks of seasons. So I think if he's healthy, I don't see why on a quarterback who's going to be wheeling and dealing all over the field, Christian Kirk can't get his too. And that could be somewhat of a detractor for Nico, and which is why I have him a little bit lower, but I don't think enough to hurt his overall value.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. And I've never been the biggest Christian Kirk guy personally, so I was just not moved whenever I saw that signing. But I could end up being very wrong in that aspect. But yeah, I still see Nico as a huge target earner and a guy that should get more than he can handle in the Texans offense. So there's 2 particular former LSU receivers that are going into year 2. And they both finished their rookie seasons inside the top 10 in fantasy points per game. And so I think we'd be doing our listeners a disservice if we didn't at least discuss them, because we've got all of them we've got both these guys inside our top 10 across the board for all of us. So Jorge, I'm going to start with you. You've got them back to back, but Neighbors has the slight edge for you. Are you hoping for a full season of Russell Wilson at quarterback, or do you think that Jackson Dart taking over would be the best option for Malik Neighbors' fantasy value, or what's kind of your outlook for Neighbors for the 2025 season that has you having him ranked as high as you do?
There are only 2 receiving options. There are only 2, to be honest with you, there are only 2 offensive options on this team that I would feel comfortable slotting into my starting lineup each and every week. One being the alpha wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, and the second one being a flex worthy, especially in PPR. In other formats, not so much, but in a full PPR, it's Wan'Dale. You see, Wan'Dale has just taken steps after step after step every single year. The targets have been there. He actually led the Giants last year in red zone targets, as opposed to Malik Neighbors. But Malik Neighbors, like everything else, right? Super hyper funneled. And now you're giving, Neighbors a deep ball, proficient, master of the deep ball, Russell Wilson as your starting quarterback. And then you have, let's say Russell Wilson doesn't start up, but Jackson Dart's not quite ready. Okay, let's give him another deep ball proficient quarterback in Jameis Winston, which
please give us Jameis.
And then let's say, okay, well, now Jackson Dart's ready to go. Okay, well, another deep ball loving quarterback. So, like, I don't see a downside for Malik Neighbors. Yeah. Obviously, the concussions last year, unfortunate. I'm not going to go on a limb saying, oh, well, he's concussion. Like, no, dude, like it's 1 year. Let's just, let's establish something before we start, labeling people as being something or the other. But again, if my competition for targets, and again, I'm big on Wan'Dale Robinson, but if he's my main competition for targets, like I'm good. Agreed completely. And so on the other side of that, Kyle, you've got Brian Thomas Jr. Actually improving on his wide receiver 10 rookie finish, which I don't mind at all, despite the fact that they did add Travis Hunter in the NFL draft. So why should our listeners still be so fired up about Brian Thomas Jr., even though they did add another really talented guy with the number 2 overall pick?
Yeah, BTJ, I think, is the real deal. It pains me to actually say it as a Titans fan, but I'm afraid I have him too low, honestly. This kid was electric last year, finished wide receiver 4, averaged almost 17 points a game in PPR scoring. You mentioned the fact about drafting Hunter. Well, the Bengals drafted Jamar Chase 5th overall, but that didn't stop T. Higgins. He had almost 1,100 yards back in 2021. Amari Cooper as well, drafted 4th overall. That didn't stop Michael Crabtree to some sort of level. He was 900 yards, but he came in with 9 touchdowns, and BTJ is better than that. And he plays in the horrific AFC South, Brian Thomas Jr. And I can honestly tell you, by watching the games, he torched the whole division, the whole year. His worst game in the division was against my Titans, and that was week 14. He still caught 8 balls for 86 yards. He just didn't score a touchdown. Matter of fact, it's like the only game in the division he didn't score besides week 18 against the Colts. I see no concern with Travis Hunter. I think these two, I hate to get lofty here, but I do. I can honestly see it. This could be a Chase Higgins tandem going forward for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I like it. BTJ makes me nervous because so much of his production last year came on deep targets and touchdowns, which are so hard to depend on year to year. And then the fact that for whatever reason it came from Mac Jones and not Trevor Lawrence, and now you got Trevor Lawrence back healthy. I think BTJ is legit. I'm with you 100%, but I'm nervous that I'm also too low on him, but I'm also nervous about moving him up because of those reasons. He's a really weird guy for me to try to rank and project, but I do agree with you that I think he's the real deal, just from a player standpoint. So, okay, to round this thing out, to close up our top 12 wide receiver discussion. So this is just my opinion, but I believe that the top 10 at receiver feels really strong this year. However you have them, I think you can make an argument that you can find 10 receivers that are a really good bet. But and Kyle, we'll go back to you. We'll start with you here. If you had to pick somebody inside your top 10 that could be at risk to finish outside the top 15, who would that be?
Drake London. You got Bijan Robinson. We didn't even talk about him. What if he gets a heavier workload?
Right.
Darnell Mooney, he could be a sleeper candidate there. I've heard rumblings where they want to get him more involved. And, oh man, am I really going to mention this? I know you're going to back this up, Drew, but what if it is Kyle Pitts season?
We can talk about Kyle Pitts.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Why?
Because
we would have to hit close and start a whole nother podcast for that.
Yeah.
You knew I was going there, though. I could tell the run-up was there. But, yeah, if Kyle Pitts really is the guy who we think he is, we've been saying it for years now, there could be – exactly. We could see a slight dip, just a slight dip, Jorge, in Drake London. Nothing crazy.
Jorge, how about you? Anybody outside of anybody different from Drake London that you're concerned about that could possibly fall out?
Yeah, so I made a case for him being inside my top 10 because balance in the force. But you know what? There's always a Darth Vader around the corner who's going to cause the dark side to shift into balance there. And I'm talking about AJ Brown. He could definitely be somebody I could see if the offense does not revert to being more balanced in Philly and it's more of the same, then AJ Brown is going to fall out of the top 12.
Yeah. So Drake London was also my pick for this, sadly, because I'm a huge Drake London guy, but not so much for the Kyle Pitts reason and more so for the Bijan Robinson just complete takeover. I think he very well could cement himself as the best running back in the entire NFL by the end of this year. And while I have all the faith in the world in Drake London, to be honest with you, I don't have a whole lot of faith in Michael Penix. I really don't know how good of an actual NFL quarterback he is. And yeah, Mr. Scampers, I'm so sorry you decided to tune in right whenever we were talking about Kyle Pitts. It's a top 12 wide receiver ranking show. We found a way to talk about Kyle Pitts, but trust me, if I'm on a show, you best believe I will find a way to talk about Kyle Pitts.
But this time it was me, not bad. It's my fault.
Okay, so on the other side of that, which wide receiver outside of your top 5 do you think has the best shot, not to just finish as a wide receiver 1, but as the wide receiver 1 overall outside of your top 5? So Jorge, we'll start with you this time.
Man, outside of my top 5 falling as the wide receiver 1 overall, I could see, oh man, he's right at the corner too. I could see, man, this is spicy.
Do it.
And Keith Fleming would love this. I would see Lad McConkey falling into my number one receiver overall.
Woo! Yeah, that's spicy. I like it though.
My
I like it.
language.
I like it. That
Like,
would be spicy.
I understand Trey Harris had a great collegiate career, but I don't think he's ready to take the reins as the de facto outside wide receiver who's going to be the dominant one on the team. I think McConkey just is one of those. I'm not going to go the Nate Markham route. He's definitely he's hyper targeted. He has great yards after the catch per reception, great yards per route run. We saw him blow up in the playoff game against the Texans this past year. Like, just everything about him just screams fantasy production. Very elusive on the field. It is. Plus, you have Justin Herbert, who I'm not out on Justin Herbert. I think Justin Herbert still has a lot of good years ahead of him. He had a bad playoff game. Like, stuff happens. Peyton Manning had a bad playoff game. Like, everybody has bad playoff games. It's how you bounce back. And I just feel like the chemistry that he had with McConkey is just going to be elevated this year. So just give me Lad McConkey, wide receiver number one overall this year.
Pass the ghost pepper, man. Pass the ghost peppers. Wow. I like it.
I don't know how you're supposed to follow that up, Kyle, but what about you?
Man, I thought I was a little spicy, but I ain't know. I'm mild. Yeah, mild cheddar. I'm going to go Nico Collins here. You talked a little bit about it, Drew. We didn't even mention that he missed 5 games at the mid part of the season last year. Would have loved to see what he could have done, because even missing those 5 games, he still caught 68 balls, 1,000 yards, finished wide receiver 23. He's actually tied with CeeDee Lamb on a points per game basis, averaging 17.6.
Right.
Third in yards per route run at 2.94. And I don't see Tank Dell playing this year. And he got quite a few targets. So the volume should rise for Nico. I know they drafted those 2 rookies. You talked about it, Drew. But they're going to lean heavily on Nico Collins. And if he could stay healthy and play all 17, if he had 1,000 yards missing 5, averaging 17 points a game like he did, I think he could reach that wide receiver 1 status if he could just stay healthy. And as long as the Texans can go back to that Texans offense we saw as well. And they were potent last year.
Yeah, and that's, I'm kind of taking the layup because Nico is my wide receiver 6, so he's right outside my top 5. But he's the guy that I had pegged for this question as well. Just with the, what if the running game isn't extremely effective with Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb getting up there in age? And what if the rookies, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel coming in from Iowa State, what if they're not, what if they don't hit, and what Christian Kirk is, on how many teams now, and he's post how many injuries? Like, outside of Nico Collins, how many of these guys do we really feel good about betting on their talent? And honestly, this is a really interesting one, but Mr. Scampers, Tyreek Hill could make us all pay for drafting him outside of the top 15. He's a guy that I've started to come around a little bit more on being in on this year. I've been nervous for most of the offseason, but seeing some of the stuff with like his ESPN open score and things like that, and seeing some of the reps that he's taking, I try not to take too much away from training camp snapshots and stuff like that. But whenever you get video clips of like receivers all in a row doing the same drill, and you can see the speed that the receivers are doing it at, there is something you can take away from that. And Tyreek looks like that the speed might not necessarily have just fallen off a cliff. And if that's the case, if the offensive line can give Tua the time to be able to throw downfield without having to worry about if he's going to be concussed for another 6 months or not, could very easily see Tyreek making us pay. I do agree with Mr. Scampers. He's been a guy that I was very low on coming into the offseason, that I have slowly started to rise on, that I like that call quite a bit as well. So before we get out of here, want to give some love to Fast Draft. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Fast Draft app today using the promo code FRAMES, which will earn you a first-time deposit match of up to $50 in credits. You can play a lot of games for that $50. They've got from the Origins games where you draft only rookies, their Flex 4 game where you pick your favorite players for the upcoming season, or their D-Up game, shout out to Shoot the Gap, or just like Flex 4, but with IDP Fantasy Football players only. 20-second timer, PPR formatted, 6-round best ball draft game is perfect for those that are on the go but itching to get their fantasy football draft fix satisfied. So that's promo code FRAMES, which will earn you a first-time deposit match of up to $50 in credits. So the Fast Draft app, start drafting faster today. So we finally made it. We're almost an hour and a half deep, but we were able to get through our top 12 wide receiver rankings along with all of the news and notes and madness that is the football offseason, where they don't even have an idea what an offseason means. But that's great for us. It's just more content. So, make sure you stay tuned here in Fantasy and Frames. We have shows coming pretty much across the board on a weekly basis. For us here on Fourth and Frames, we will be back same time next Wednesday. We're going to finally put a bow on these way too early ranking series where we're going to talk about our top 12 tight ends. Could not pay me to talk about more than 12. 12 is painful enough. Outside of that, we'll just go around the frames real quick before we get out of here. Jorge, Kyle, let the folks know what you're doing, what you're working on.
Kyle, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Like I said earlier on the show, when we first kicked it off, if you're a Dynasty football player and you want to get in and read some good stuff, check out fantasyandframes.com. We are both, Aiden and I are both attacking this as much as we can. Dynasty Risers, Dynasty Fallers. I got Bo Nix coming out for a Dynasty Riser. That should come out sometime, I don't know, next week, whenever Jorge can get around to publish it. I know that Aiden committed to doing Jalen Waddle. So if you're interested in a little Jalen Waddle Dynasty, he's going to do a Riser article on that. Give him some time, though. He's going through some stuff. So we're with Aiden right now thinking of him. But he will get that out when he can. And, fantasyandframes.com. Catch me on X at KZ1180. And, it's been fun, guys.
A lot of things. Man, Moggs in the YouTube chat just said a name that I think is going to mess all of our rankings up this year.
He very well could.
I think JSN could possibly crack the top 12, to be honest with you.
100%.
That's another article I wrote. JSN Dynasty Riser. Check that out.
Thank you for the support, Angie. Yeah, and absolutely go check out Kyle's article on JSN. If you're not bullish on him yet, I promise you will be after you read the article. And if you already are, you're going to be even more bullish after you read the article. So definitely go check that out.
But we got our graphics guy, one of our graphics guy, Jim Bednar. He's going to be putting out his first article at Fantasy and Frames, doing a Best Ball 101 article. This guy is, for those who don't know, Jim is a very behind the scenes guy, but I'm going to give him some love here because he does a lot of great work for our graphic stuff. He sets up all of our studios. He makes sure that we have everything that we need, but he's also a high stakes fantasy football player. He's always playing in these big tournaments each and every year. He's bringing home the loot each and every year. He is he knows this stuff, and so he definitely knows a lot of best ball. So he will be giving us our Best Ball 101 article. I'll be giving you a IDP 101 article coming out soon. We got all the risers and fallers. I'll be doing some risers and fallers for IDP as well. All of our rankings are for everybody here. I feel like they're getting constantly updated each and every day, each and every week. So we constantly have, opinions that we're going to be giving to you. Tomorrow night, we're going to cap off the rest of our programming here at Fantasy and Frames with one of our new podcasts here, Rider Dynasty. So they're going to be doing a Scott Fishbowl mock. And then on the draft show with Stacey Perez, Erica Brown, and Kevin Tompkins, they're going to be doing an underdog puppy draft live tomorrow night. All that kicks off tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And everything is we're starting to ramp up. In a couple weeks, I do want to plug the draft show. We're going to have our first Scott Fishbowl expert mock. It's basically going to be Team Fantasy Alarm versus Team Fantasy and Frames and Company. Because we got Howard Bender, we got Colby Conway, we got Andrew Cooper representing Fantasy Alarm. Then, of course, we got Kevin, Stacy, and Erica, plus any of you out there that want to get in on the fun for that mock draft. So Team FA versus Team FIF. That should be a lot of fun. But, thank you very much, Drew, for having me on Fourth and Frames. It's always a pleasure.
No, I appreciate you. Appreciate you guys both joining us. Then I'll be looking forward to that. Look, Fantasy and Frames in my heart is the number one in the fantasy world. But if I had to pick a 1B, it would probably be Fantasy Alarm and those guys, Howard and Coop and those guys over there. They do great work. So I'll be really excited for that. But yeah, we appreciate you guys joining along with us. Scampers, Angie, Moggs, everybody in the chat. Appreciate you guys hanging out. As has been mentioned, if you want to be on top of the content we're releasing, you just heard some of the stuff that's coming at you just over the next week. Make sure that you subscribe to the Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel. There's going to be a little bell that's going to pop up. Go ahead and click the bell too, so that you can get the notifications whenever those come. And make sure you check out the website for all of our rankings and all the articles that are coming from Kyle and Aiden and everybody else on the team that's putting those out. There's going to be a lot more to come, a lot of rankings, a lot of rankings updates, a lot of articles coming out, and then these podcasts coming out as quick as you can handle them as well. So if you're out there and you need fantasy football content and you're not hanging out with us at Fantasy and Frames, I don't know what in the world you're doing. But with that being said, you can find me over on the Twitterverse at Drew3MR. More importantly, go check out our main account at Fantasy and Frames. But until next week, I'm Drew, Kyle, Jorge, Toodles.